Hello again and welcome back to Know Your Ship with me, Chase. Today we are going to look at the Admiral class battlecruiser, the HMS Hood. I've got to say, she is probably my all-time favorite warship. I mean, I find her story absolutely fascinating. So I hope in this episode I will get to tell you her story. Anyways, sit back, relax, and enjoy the history of the HMS Hood.
She was designed in the First World War, and construction began on her in Glasgow in 1916. But suddenly the work was halted. 3 British battlecruisers had just been sunk at the Battle of Jutland by the Germans. As the Admiral at the scene commented, there seemed to be something wrong with the design of British ships. What was wrong with the British ships was that they had insufficient deck armour. For decades, warships had heavy steel side or belt armour. But over the years, as guns got more powerful and could be fired over longer ranges, shells were now plunging down from greater heights. Bill Durans is a forensic expert and advisor to the US Navy. On board the Northern Horizon, he explains why navies started to get worried by high plunging shells.
Plunging fire is anything that is going down steeply enough so that it's not really intercepting any of the belt armor before it hits the decks. That's the stuff that's dangerous, because that goes right through into the magazine areas and right through into the engineering spaces.
Hood was quickly redesigned, but crucially, only the front half of the ship was given extra deck armor, in a bid to keep the weight down. The intention had always been to have her in for a refit and strengthen the back part of the ship, particularly over the back ammunition magazines. Somehow, with all her diplomatic goodwill missions, there never seemed to be the right time.
HMS Hood was launched in 1918. She was built on a massive scale. Her long, sleek hull made her not only faster, but also more impressive. To carry her 20 heavy guns and travel at a top speed of 30 knots, she needed 4 huge turbines. Over 860 feet long, she was the Royal Navy's largest ship and a potent symbol of Britain's global might. Her formidable 15-inch guns beat out a clear warning to potential enemies.
At the time she was built, and certainly well on to the late 1930s, there was no warship in the world that was bigger or more powerful than Hood. And she symbolized everything that was great about Great Britain.
In the 1920s and 30s, Hood reigned supreme in an era of gunboat diplomacy. She even went on a world tour, visiting far-flung corners of the empire, receiving over 700,000 visitors and showing the world that Britannia ruled the waves. A rare colour film of the ship, taken 2 years before she was sunk, has recently come to light after lying hidden in a private collection for years. It shows Hood just before the outbreak of World War II.
Colour.
David, Innes and Philip have never seen the footage before.
There she is.
It's going to be 20, 30 seconds of her passing by the entire screen.
Yeah. Oh, that is mightily impressive, isn't it? I mean,
Can you imagine the reaction around the world as she went on her global trip in the 1920s? Sheer unadulterated power. The Navy's iconic symbol.
it's graceful though, isn't it? I mean, it's quite a beautiful ship. I mean, if that steamed down the Solent today, everybody would just gape in awe at it, you know, because it's such a hugely impressive ship.
I just wonder how many of those lads were still on board. I would think actually quite a few, because you joined for a commission. Most of those, I think, would still have been on board 2 years later. 1920s, she must, not only is she the largest ship in the Royal Navy, she's the largest ship in the world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There's nothing the Americans got, there's nothing the Japanese got, there's nothing the Germans got. No one's got anything that compares to her, her power and might and appearance.
Yeah.
July 1940, in London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill confronts a new crisis. France has fallen to the Nazis. The fate of her navy is yet to be determined. Churchill forbids French ships in British ports to put to sea. He dispatches a powerful squadron of warships to confront what remains of the French force in the Mediterranean at a place called Mers El Kébir, Algeria. It is an impressive show of British sea power. Two 35,000-ton battleships, the carrier Ark Royal, and leading the squadron, Britain's ultimate symbol of naval supremacy, the battlecruiser HMS Hood. At 42,000 tons with 8 15-inch guns, the Hood is considered the most powerful warship in the world. At 32 knots, she is also among the fastest. Aboard the Hood, in command of the British Strike Force, is Vice Admiral James Somerville. He anchors his flotilla at Gibraltar and prepares to send his emissary, Cedric Holland, to reason with the French Admiral, Marcel Gensoul. In a final briefing to his officers aboard the Hood, Somerville is grave. I am ordered to inform the French. They must either bring their ships to British harbors and fight with us, steam with reduced crews through a British port and demilitarize their ships immediately, or scuttle them. Should the French be unwilling, we must then destroy the French ships. For 2 days, Holland travels back and forth between Gensoul and Somerville. The Admiral is immovable. If he accepts any of the British options, he will betray his word to the Germans and France will be punished. And so shortly after noon on July 3, 1940, the Hood trains her guns on the port of Mers El Kébir, where 4 French battleships and a collection of auxiliary vessels lie defiantly at anchor. France and England have not fired a shot at each other in 125 years. The British battleships open fire. In just 10 minutes, 3 French battleships and a destroyer are out of commission. Churchill has called it the deadly stroke. When it is over, 1,290 men of the French Navy are dead. 1,000 more have been wounded. The French Admiral presides over the mass burial. He says, if there is a stain on the flag, it is certainly not on ours. Aboard the Hood, Admiral Somerville writes to his wife, we all feel thoroughly dirty and ashamed. I think it was the biggest political blunder of modern times.
The treacherous icy waters of the Denmark Strait, 300 miles west of Iceland. One of the greatest sea battles of the Second World War took place here 71 years ago. The pride of the British Navy, the aging battlecruiser HMS Hood, confronted Hitler's newly completed German battleship Bismarck. On May the 19th, 1941, the Bismarck slipped out of the port of Gottenhaven, Germany, on her maiden voyage. It was accompanied by the cruiser Prince Eugen. The Bismarck hoped to avoid detection as it headed into the Atlantic, but British intelligence received sighting reports as the ship sailed through the narrow stretch of water between Denmark and Sweden. Throughout the war, convoys had sailed the icy North Atlantic, bringing essential supplies to beleaguered Britain. The Admiralty now feared Bismarck had them in her sights.
So the loss of a single convoy was going to be potentially very, very devastating. And the Germans knew that. You know, ultimately, if they could blockade Britain, they had a good chance of starving us out of the war.
Unknown to the Germans, 30 miles to the southeast, 2 British ships steer an intercept course at full speed. The battleship Prince of Wales and the pride of the British Navy, HMS Hood. Admiral Lancelot Holland commands the operation from Hood. Ted Briggs is an 18-year-old signalman.
Hood's reputation was fantastic. She was the be-all and end-all as far as we were concerned. Without a doubt, she was the most famous warship of any kind, of any country.
Admiral Holland's battle plan has already suffered a setback. He had hoped to beat the Germans to the mouth of the Denmark Strait and cross their T, positioned to fire all his guns in full broadside. But during the night, the British lose contact with the enemy. The morning finds them out of position. The Germans now have the upper hand.
The Germans find that they have achieved completely by accident the tactical advantage that sailors since Nelson have been looking for. They're effectively crossing the T of the enemy. This means that Bismarck can bring all her guns to bear, whilst the British are steaming in column and only their forward guns can bear initially.
But the British steam in unafraid. Hood is the embodiment of British sea power. At 5:37 a.m., 14 miles from the Germans, Hood shoots first. The shells land off Prince Eugen's starboard bow. A salvo from Prince of Wales quickly follows. The British shells miss their mark. British armor-piercing shells plunge into the sea. Huge columns of water erupt around the German ships, but Admiral Lutyens holds his fire.
Und so viel ich mich erinnern kann, haben wir etwas früher gewechselt.
We went to action stations and were waiting for orders to fire. The anticipation was unbearable. We knew we were under attack. But why weren't we shooting back?
Lutyens' job, as he saw it, was not to fight warships. His job was to destroy commerce. If he was badly damaged, he'd have to return to port, his mission over.
The British blast away. Shells scream over the German ships at almost 2,000 miles per hour. But Lutyens still refuses to return fire. Finally, a frustrated Captain Lindemann steps in and says, "I will not have my ship shot out from under my ass." Bismarck opens fire. Lethal one-ton shells tear toward Hood. Germany has unleashed the fury of the most powerful warship on Earth. Both Hood and Bismarck are armed with 8 15-inch guns that can hurl 1,700-pound shells over 15 miles. But Bismarck's newer guns can fire 3 shells a minute to Hood's 2. The critical difference is armor. Bismarck, a battleship, is heavily armored. Hood, a battlecruiser built for speed, is not.
They were designed to hunt down and sink enemy cruisers. They were never designed to stand up in a line of battle against battleships.
The armor on Hood's deck is no more than 3 inches thick. Shells dropping from a steep angle, called plunging fire, can easily punch through and explode inside.
She was always intended to go in for a full refit, to have the deck armor fortified. But unfortunately, war was declared and she couldn't be spared.
Now, on May 24th, 1941, Hood and Bismarck opened fire.
When the big guns fired, the entire ship staggered. It felt like it was bending and was pushed sideways in the water. It was amazing. The guns were so incredibly powerful.
Hood and Prince of Wales are here. Bismarck and Prinz Eugen are here, 13 miles away. Knowing the threat of plunging fire to Hood, the British race in, trying to get close enough to force the German gunners to fire at a flat trajectory. The shells will hopefully strike Hood's 12-inch hull armor, rather than the thin deck. Bismarck's first salvo barely misses, exploding just off Hood's starboard bow. Bismarck fires again. The German gunners zero in with deadly efficiency. The pride of the Royal Navy is squarely in their sights. The most powerful warship afloat, the German battleship Bismarck and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, exchange fire with the pride of the British Navy, HMS Hood and Prince of Wales. Bismarck and Prinz Eugen are here, northwest of Hood and Prince of Wales. The Germans have the advantage. They're able to fire a full broadside, while the British are only able to use their forward guns. Just 4 minutes into the battle, the Germans draw first blood. A shell rips through Hood's ammunition locker, exploding 4-inch anti-aircraft shells. A hurricane of shrapnel cuts down the men on the deck. From the compass platform, the highest point of Hood's bridge, Ted Briggs witnesses the carnage.
That hit penetrated at the base of the mainmast, and it caused a fire around the 4-inch ready-use lockers, which was creating one hell of a mess and killed quite a lot of people.
Another shell strikes Hood close to her main tower. The situation is desperate. At 8 miles, Admiral Holland orders a hard turn to port to bring her full broadside to bear.
At this point, Vice Admiral Holland probably felt that he had closed the range sufficiently enough to be out from under the danger of plunging fire.
But Holland has miscalculated. Bismarck fires her 8 15-inch guns. The rangefinders locked on Hood.
Ja, dann ist nur, haben wir ja die Abschüsse gemerkt.
The enormous blasts rocked the ship back into the water due to the recoil.
Abschüsse in die, der Rückstoß.
We knew if the shells hit their target, there would be tremendous damage.
Seconds in flight, a single 1,700-pound armor-piercing shell plunges through Hood. Dead center. The armor-piercing shell penetrates deep into the bowels of the ship. The powder in a main magazine ignites. British crewmen on Prince of Wales watch in muted horror as a geyser of flames spewed from Hood's ruptured deck.
This massive amount of powder in that magazine did something we call deflagration. It's like a giant Roman candle burning in an enclosed space.
Then, a huge explosion buckles the hull, twisting and shearing the mighty ship in half. The bow lifts vertically into the air as her midsection sinks.
She'd gone about 30 degrees, 30, 40 degrees, I suppose. We realised that she just wasn't coming back. There was no order given to abandon ship. It wasn't necessary.
Ted Briggs and the men on the compass platform struggled to escape.
The flag lieutenant was just in front of me. And the squadron navigating officer, Commander Warren, stood to one side to let me go through. He just went like that. Can't forget that.
Across the water, the Germans look on at their stricken adversary.
The ship broke into pieces. We were sure an explosion of that kind must have killed everybody.
As Hood slides beneath the waves, her forward turret fires a final defiant salvo before slipping into darkness.
I managed to get out of the starboard door of the compass platform, down the ladder to the Admiral's bridge, which was directly underneath. And it was about halfway down that ladder when I became level with the water. And it was dragging me down.
Briggs is pulled deeper and deeper by the sinking ship.
I honestly thought I'd had it. It was then that I suddenly seemed to shoot to the surface. And I came up and looked around, and there was the ship. About 50 yards away, like that. I panicked, turned and tried and swim away as fast as I could. When I looked round again, she'd gone. And there was a fire on the water where she'd been. There were only 3 of us that came to the surface. Of the other 1,418 were lost.
Als uns bekannt wurde, dass die Hood versenkt sei.
When we heard that the Hood was sinking, we were celebrating what we accomplished. But then we were horrified at the devastation that was happening. We recognized that on Hood, there were many sailors who must have suffered a horrible death from the explosion.
Und somit also einen schrecklichen Tod durch die Explosion erlitten haben mussten.
The captain's day room, once an ornate room where the captain received guests, was turned inside out by the force of the explosion.
It's not all the same type of material at all. The beams on it are different.
The extent of the damage is confirmation that it was the 15-inch magazine directly below it that exploded, and not the torpedoes stored in a different part of the ship. But the magazines were heavily armor-plated. They shouldn't have exploded. For the answer, David and Innes turned to Philip Wilcox's specialist knowledge of ship design. How could a shell penetrate the lower decks where the ammunition was stored? Philip believes that the Bismarck must have made an incredibly lucky hit.
The shell comes through here. It goes in the vicinity of the mainmast, which is what we know. It punches through lightweight shell plating through to here. It then hits around the armoured deck there.
The Bismarck shell crashed through the Hood's lightly armoured deck to the ammunition stores below.
What you've also seen is that the fact that there's been this Admiral's cabin has been ripped apart.
Bearing in mind where these magazines are we actually looking at this event we're coming up here? Because this whole deck has bent almost back on itself at this point.
After years of controversy, now at last they have the full picture. A lucky shot tore through the Hood's defences at their weakest point. The 15-inch magazines exploded, tearing the ship apart. No one stood a chance. David and the team have proved what 2 boards of inquiry never could.
I mean, we're looking at a piece of the wreck that is incredibly close to the source of the major explosion that destroyed the ship.
This is the center of the whole section of the ship that's missing, that's been obliterated. So, you know, it nails that down absolutely a 100%.
But one question still remains. Could the disaster have been avoided? By looking at the underwater footage shot during the expedition, they might get lucky.
Well, it's that, I mean, clearly a lot of that must be sort of rusticals, I imagine.
They're looking for footage of the rudder to see if it will reveal if Holland made the critical turn.
We're looking at that bit right there.
All Navy commanders were taught to sail at full speed head-on towards the enemy. At the very last moment, they would turn the warship sideways so both front and rear guns could be unleashed on the enemy. At the speed the Hood was going, it would take just 30 seconds to make the change of course. For years, people have argued whether the Hood made this maneuver or not. If the Hood made the turn, Admiral Holland gave the boat its best chance. If it didn't, this would have hugely limited the ship's chances of survival and means Holland got his tactics wrong. Eyewitnesses differ. No one knows whether the Hood turned. David and Innes now review the ROV footage they hope will finally provide an answer.
And there's no damage here. Look. That's just the underside where it would have hit the seabed. If it had landed on the seabed, this whole section here would be damaged, and it isn't. Right. It's pristine.
Yeah.
All the way. This rudder is intact.
The lack of any damage shows that the rudder wasn't moved when the ship hit the sea floor. And it's proof that Admiral Holland had indeed begun the turn just before the Hood was hit by the Bismarck.
What we're seeing there is a moment in time, you know, a very, very iconic image of Hood's last turn. And we've been able to confirm that is the case.
So I'm absolutely convinced the rudder wasn't dislodged, it didn't impact on the seabed. Holland had not just ordered that turn, but Hood actually executed it and was probably halfway through it when she was finally hit. So that's an absolute firm conclusion that has come from this expedition.
Holland and his captain Ralph Kerr were taking split-second decisions in the heat of battle. After years of speculation, the evidence shows they did the right thing, but even so, it wasn't enough.
You look at Holland and Kerr and these commanders who virtually study and spend their whole naval careers getting ready for this one moment, and their decision could be off by 30 seconds. Not criticizing Holland, just the unluck of it. Could be off by 30 seconds, and it results in the loss of his ship and all his men and his life.
And that's all, folks. Hope you enjoyed this episode about the HMS Hood. If you like what I'm doing, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more episodes. Stay tuned for another episode tomorrow, and take care, and see you all on the high seas.